Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. This is News and Views right here on Salam Media. The time is exactly 15 minutes after 8 o'clock, and the big picture story on Salam Media this morning is with a retired US diplomat who is now based in South Africa. That is Brooks Spector, and he's going to be talking to us about, obviously, the updates on the Russian invasion or the Russian war on the Ukraine. Uh, I guess, like very many other people around the world, I thought that within a week or two of the invasion by the Russians, the issue would be resolved, and whatever diplomatic talks needed to be had to make the Russians happy, or to perhaps come to some form of a compromise so that the carnage we see now in the Ukraine could have been avoided. You also ask the question about the United Nations and other peacekeeping forces and ambassadors and countries all around the world. That many days later, and after such large scale devastation, talks haven't resulted in any sort of peace between the two countries. And let's just look at the impact on the global economy. Let's look at the impact on food and fuel prices. I think we're all cringing from that matter. And more importantly, the poor Ukrainians, the lives, unnecessary, innocent lives that have been lost. And if and when peace does eventually come to that part of the world, how long is it going to take for them to start up again, to rebuild their cities and the devastated infrastructure? So all of those questions is what we're going to be looking at this morning. Let's welcome to the program Brooks Spector. Very good morning to you. Welcome.
Well, good morning. And with that agenda, I guess we have to spend about 4 hours, don't we? Going through all the pieces of your agenda.
Absolutely.
You set out an ambitious postgraduate seminar in your ideas for a conversation. Let me just add before you go any further that I've been retired from the U.S. Foreign Service for close to 20 years,
Sure.
and my current circumstances in Johannesburg are that I'm associate editor of the online publication, The Daily Maverick, which I'm sure you and many of your audience members have looked at over the last dozen years or so, and I hope you do. To take the
Well,
the
before let me just interrupt you here, Brooks. You preempted that question of mine. I was going to ask you, what's your business now in South Africa? And talking about the Daily Maverick, we do engage with them from time to time. So thank you for putting us in the picture, and
No problem.
let's proceed. And I think I've kind of given you my thinking regarding this war, Russia into Ukraine. And I think my thinking is not that far removed from the rest of the world or the global, citizenry, thinking where and how do we recover from this war. So over to
Well,
you.
I mean, the big issue or the fundamental issue uh, was sadly an unwillingness on the part of Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, one of the 15 successor states to the old Soviet Union, his unwillingness to accept the reality that Ukraine was an entirely independent nation and that its borders, its sovereignty were just as uh, sovereign, I guess is the only way to say it, were just as important as anybody else's. And the unwillingness on the part of Vladimir Putin and others like him into believing that Ukraine was fundamentally a separate nation and not part of a part of Russia to be reunited with it. And the pressures on Ukraine to come to that party uh, grew. The Russians put something like, depending on who you read, 150 to 200,000 troops and other war materiel uh, on its borders, and then 100 days or so ago launched an invasion, and there is no other word to be used here, an invasion of Ukraine, with the idea that they would quickly reach the capital of Kiev, overthrow the Ukrainian government that was in being, declare a new, more fraternal, more bending to the Russian idea of sovereignty, and things would move back to the older 19th century view of Russia as a world civilization that incorporated Ukraine as part of it. And one of the things that history matters. Uh, the territory we now call the Ukraine, if you go back in history far enough, 1,000 years, 1,100 years or so, not nothing to be sure. Um, the original origin place for what we now think of as Russia was in fact based out of what was then Kiev, uh, and it was called the state of Rus, R-U-S, which not surprisingly sounds rather like Russia.
Mm.
Um, but now, once Ukraine declared its independence in the breakup of the Soviet Union, many people in that country, more and more, began to think of themselves as oriented more toward Western Europe than toward their old circumstances as part of the Soviet Union or Tsarist Russia, for that matter. And the two key elements of that would have been membership, or at least a very close association with the European Union, that grouping of 27 nations in Europe, Western Europe, from Portugal on through to many of the countries of the old Eastern Europe, in an economic union, and potentially, although it was never officially and explicitly done, to apply for membership in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which stretches from the United States to Poland. Um, Now, the Russians, or at least Vladimir Putin, argued that the very idea that Ukraine would join NATO, let alone the
Mm.
European Union, was sufficiently an anathema, sufficiently uh, wrong, sufficiently threatening, that they would have to do everything that they could to prevent it. And that obviously included an invasion at this point. Now, your question about whether or not, oh, sorry, let me back up for a sec. The invasion, at least at the outset, turned out to be something of a failure of Russian arms. They did not reach Kiev. The Ukrainian army turned out to be much more resilient than almost anybody thought, much more effective. They were, after all, fighting on home soil for families, home, heart, and the rest, and much more effective in their actual military strategy and tactics. Now, they made good use, excellent use of a stream of Western supplied weapons, anti tank uh, material like the Stinger and the Javelin handheld missiles. You see pictures of them. They're shoulder fired weapons that can destroy a tank at several hundred meters with strong accuracy. And it turned out that the Russian military, the strategy and the tactics they used, bunched up all their tanks, and that didn't work. And they were repelled at the gates of Kiev, and they reoriented their strategy to attack the eastern side of Ukraine, where there had been two long simmering separatist revolts in provinces at the very eastern edge of the country, adjacent to Russia, where the population is more ethnically Russian than anything else. Now, as to your question about why didn't negotiations or the power of global opinion or the UN or anybody else bring all this to an end, it's actually very hard to have negotiations when only one side is prepared to discuss things.
Mm.
Um, the position of the Russians effectively was, what we want is what we want, and we will negotiate just how well that will be accomplished. And then it's not, for the Ukrainians, an acceptable or plausible approach. There will be negotiations in some way, shape, or form eventually, because the old adage is true. Wars eventually end, and then you have to sit down and figure out, what does the end look like? Does it end in the total annihilation and defeat of a nation? Does it end in a negotiated settlement? Does it end in the exchange of populations and prisoners? Does it end in reparations for the destruction that has been wrought upon the invaded nation? Does it end in an acceptance of a new border? Does it end in an agreement that the borders as defined previously are the ones that hold? Will there be votes, referenda, plebiscites in various pieces of territory about where that bit of territory will become part of which nation state? These are all questions that come from the battlefield rather than a substitute for it, I think.
Okay, so Brooke, we're going to need to take an ad break in a minute or two, but let me just put this question to you, which you can respond to me after that.
Sure.
Once some form of, let's assume, Russia and Ukraine and other world leaders sit down and start talking ceasefire, would that mean that the Ukraine, and it's going to depend a lot on how this plays out. Is Russia only going to be satisfied and will back off once it takes Ukraine, under its wing as part of Russia? If that happens, does that then also suggest that Putin has his eyes on other countries around Russia, other Eastern Bloc countries? We also know that Sweden and one or two other countries in that part of the world are thinking about joining NATO. Does that then suggest that Russia is going to be eyeing them as well? And this invasion of Ukraine has given Russia that much more confidence going forward, does it not? Even though Ukraine is standing firm, they're fighting back, they've recovered some lost territory. Russia has gone in and they're now blowing up bridges in an area in the city of, I think, and I hope I pronounce this correctly, Severodonetsk. And the whole idea is if they blow up bridges, then it will prevent the Ukraine from bringing in military reinforcement. So those are all of the issues we need to look at. Undoubtedly, world leaders are looking at these issues as well. And then the very important issue, we know what's happening with oil and gas prices all around the world. The impact is being felt by everybody, countries all around the world. Food, oil, and gas prices. Can you respond to all of that right after the ad break? Please stay with us. It is exactly 8:29 a.m.
There's no smell that takes me back to the comfort of my childhood than the smell of black seed oil being applied by my nanny. Now I'm using tib black seed in my own home to soothe sniffles and coughs, to help with digestion and immunity, and of course, as part of my beauty routine. After all these years, I've come to appreciate the wisdom in finding comfort and shifa in trusted treatments like tib black seed. You can find tib black seed at all leading pharmacies or find out more at blackseed.co.za.
One of the most important things you can do on this earth is to let people know they are not alone. That the frustration of communities who struggle to earn the very basic is not their cry alone. Discharging your zakah is the starting point for creating a sustainable community and taking action. It's the impetus for creating lasting change and hope. Donate your zakah to the Al Fida Foundation, supporting over 10,000 Muslim families in the Eastern and Western Cape of South Africa. We need your help to assist our neighbors of need. Contact the Al Fida Foundation at 041 484 1288 or view or visit our website at www.alfida.co.za. The Al Fida Foundation, your partner in social investment.
At Sentio, our Invest for Good philosophy is based on a real desire to use our investment skills for the benefit of broader society. We are committed to supporting our community by investing responsibly, giving charitably, and developing talent that will transform the investment industry. As an ethically based asset manager, we are focused on delivering superior risk-adjusted returns for our clients, regardless of market conditions. Visit us at www.sentio-capital.com for more information on our Sharia investment products and start saving with us today. Sentio Capital Management. Invest for good. Sentio Capital Management is an authorized financial services provider.
Once again, Maulana Timol will be taking a trip abroad for Qurbani. Many people in the villages live well below the poverty line and only eat meat on the days of Eid al-Adha. Support this cause at 1,820 Rand for 7 shares or 260 Rand per share. Contact Maulana Timol, Maulana Sajjad, Maulana Hamad or Maulana Abbad on 011 852 6324 or 8584 or 8538 or 072 299 9268. All slaughtering will be supervised by a team of foreign and local ulama. Visit www.operationqurbani.org.za.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media.
What does the African continent mean to us and to the rest of the world?
As the African continent, more needs to be done, not only to shed light on the importance of Africa Day, but have a platform to discuss the challenges and also discuss the opportunities that we have on the African continent.
Listen to some fresh. To Salam Media. Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media, your humanitarian broadcaster.
The time is exactly 8:33 a.m. My guest is Brooks Spector. We're talking about, obviously, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. Brooks, I do know you indicated that we need hours to get through this discussion, but we've just got 5 minutes more left. I hand over to you to wrap up for us on all of the questions I put to you this morning.
In brief, let me start by saying there are two different things going on. One is the war on the ground, in which the Russians appear to be making again some inroads in the eastern part of the country. The Ukrainian president has said something like 20%, 1/5 of the country is now effectively under Russian military control. But they are holding fast and gaining some territory back in various places. But that particular question on the ground has a counterpart internationally. I'm trying to bring all your points together all at the same time. There is the strategic question of nations like Finland and Sweden, after decades of declared neutrality during the Cold War and even after, in deciding that the Russian threat is sufficient to change their entire international relations profile and apply for membership in NATO themselves. And that would double the extent of Russian exposure to NATO on the border, and the two very effective militaries, and top of the line, first class militaries in the case of Sweden and Finland. That, to my mind, is a strategic failure on the part of Russia, rather than conquering or compelling Ukraine to bend to its will. It brought new enemies to bear, or at least new opponents to bear against them. It closes off the Baltic Sea entirely to Russia, almost entirely, and it brings NATO, the NATO alliance, much closer to Russia's second city of St. Petersburg. I mean, for that reason alone, Vladimir Putin should be embarrassed at the way in which the strategic dimension has gone against him. But the economic question also matters. As you've indicated, Russian oil Russian oil and natural gas has been an important part of its exports to Western Europe for at least the last 15 years. And it is now extremely difficult for countries like Germany and Italy and a number of others, Austria, and a number of others, to wean themselves off of that dependence. But they have, in fact, reached agreement that they will do so by the end of this year. The food question is composed of several dimensions. One, Ukraine was one of the world's leading exporters of grain, and corn especially. And those exports primarily, not completely, but primarily went to South Asia, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And it is creating a condition of greater food insecurity in nations as far afield as Lebanon and Libya and various African states, because that grain is no longer available for commercial sale or for purchase by the UN's World Food Program or other international aid bodies. At the same time, they also produce what we call edible oils. Now, that sounds a little weird, but edible oils are things like canola oil, sunflower oil, which are essential to many people in their daily life as well. That's driven the price up because scarcity will do that, but it also simply makes it less and less available to people here and anywhere else, because it's not a monopoly, but it's certainly a major share of the world trade in those commodities. Russian oil and natural gas, on the other hand, some of it is being bought up by China and India at what presumably are below market prices, in a desperate effort by the Russians to sell their oil off, because eventually they will have to store what they bring up from the oil wells if they can't sell it. And then they will have to close oil wells, and that becomes a complex and physically difficult process too. In the middle of all that, OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, has in fact taken some steps to increase its production and sale to the world, which may to some degree mitigate against growing prices, although the calculations I've seen say the world petroleum price now per barrel is lower than it was in real dollar terms than I think it was 10 years ago. So oil and natural gas prices are a question, but they are not the deal breaker on world political and economic circumstances in quite the way that food and edible oils may be. All that leads us to, in the last 2 or 3 seconds worth of my time, to say that eventually there should be presumably more pressure on Russia to end its invasion, to withdraw from some or all of Ukraine's territory, and to bring the question of reparation. So much has been destroyed by Russian bombs, missiles, and cruise missiles, and the act of aggression on the ground, that somewhere, in some way, shape, or form, that's all got to be rebuilt and paid for. Who is going to do that will be a question that's going to be the subject of enormously important, intense, and vigorous debate before that's up.
Okay, Brooks, that's where we have to leave it. Like you indicated, we could sit here for hours talking about this issue because it impacts everyone globally. Till the next time, as always, thank you indeed for your valued time.
My pleasure. You take care of yourself.
God bless. 8:40 exactly, news and views right here on Salam Media.